I will call the August 29th, 2022 meeting of Newcastle's Planning Commission to order. And we'll start with a roll call. Where do you want to start?
Sure. Karen Van Louise.
Cynthia Patty.
Gail Seitz.
Matthew Lovely.
Kristen Zumar.
George Velasquez.
We do have a quorum. I think we're expecting others to come, but with traffic parking, we have to come a little bit late. So we'll start with the minutes. Are there any you want to announce your presence?
Yes, Bree Rivera.
Are there any corrections, comments before the motion on the minute? Motion to approve,
A motion to approve minutes.
second? All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. So on the agenda, we have moved public comments on agenda items to the beginning of the agenda. And this is what council, Newcastle Council is doing at the present time. And it is on agenda items only. So I thought I'd give a very brief summary of what we will be covering tonight. The Flathead River Edge, we're going to be discussing next steps. We've seen the concept plan and have reviewed comments from state planning following a plus review. Both the comprehensive plan, land use and zoning need to be changed for this project. And both the plus review from the state and our city code state that the comprehensive plan land use map needs to be amended before taking action on rezoning. So we will be discussing a workshop to determine the merits of changing the land use from light industrial office park to mixed use. And then the 7th Street project, which I believe is called the Battery. We will be reviewing the concept plan for the first time. The comprehensive plan land use for this is mixed use, and the zoning is downtown gateway. However, it is a mixed use multifamily project, which is a special exception for the downtown gateway zone. And there are some other variances that will be needed. So this will go to the Board of Adjustment. However, the Planning Commission can make recommendations for additional information before that happens. And then we'll be getting some updates on some special projects going on in the city, like the transportation plan and the sea level rise task force and any others that commissioners would like to discuss. So comments need to be directed to the entire commission and not to any one individual. I do have a timer, and we're going to follow council's lead and limit comments to 3 minutes. So are there any public comments, not applicant? I think there's a lot of people in here related to the applicants, but public comment from City of Newcastle.
Yes, Bill Gross, 1301 13th Street. I think by limiting, you're kind of channeling what people are able to address, but I'll address what I can. It's coincidental, today is the 17th anniversary of what happened down in Louisiana. They weren't prepared. They built up. Look what happened. 1,800 people died. Billions of dollars done. You're talking about a project down on the gateway, mixed. More people on an escape route, an evacuation route, that floods and can't handle the people that are already there. And Planning Commission Board of Adjustment wants to accept more construction projects. The sooner you stop it, the safer our residents of the city are gonna be. And it's coincidental, I showed 3 legislators this week the agenda, and they said they found it pretty ironic that you have development building and sea level rise issues on the same agenda. Do you see a problem with that? Developers? No, it's your own personal gain and goal that's more important to you.
Bill, would you direct your comments
Yes,
to the
I
commission,
think
please?
the board, the commission needs to put together your heads and request from city council a 1-year moratorium till you guys and the sea level rise committee and WMAPCO and everybody can get together with a definitive plan on escape, on the environment and everything else and the natural habitat before you go pushing through projects. The Gateway on one end, Lucan's Drive on the other end. Couple thousand more people on an area that you can't handle as it is. And Lucan's Drive coming into Cherry Lane, it's an impossibility for that intersection to be expanded and to handle any more traffic. It's an impossibility. So again, I beg, I ask, I plead the commission to put your heads together and do what's right for the residents, not for special interest developers. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Anyone else?
I'd like to speak. My name is Karen. I live at 621 Berry Street. I have been attending the sea level rise task force meetings as well. And I am greatly concerned about that development perspective for Lucan's Drive area. I did have my thoughts together for the commission or for the task force, and Alice, asked me to put in a letter to town council, which I did. The big points of it were just being that with the way things are happening this season.
Oh, sorry.
I'm gonna wait because I really want my comments to be.
No,
heard.
that was
Thank you
the
so
last one.
much. Can I
Um,
have a seat?
let me start this again. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, I appreciate you. Thank you.
All right, let me start this again.
Thank you. But anyway, yeah, they said to please put it in writing because I would like the sea level rise task force to write a recommendation to the planning commission to not allow this change of zoning. And the reason why is because we need every square inch of unused, undeveloped land to take up the water that is happening now. We don't exactly know. I mean, we can do a DENREC look at what those lands are there, but regardless, we need every scrap of area that isn't covered with cement. Have y'all seen the news today? Have you seen what's happening in Jackson, Mississippi? 36 feet high water, 10 feet higher than the normal flood would be considered. 36 feet of water. We are playing Russian roulette. I mean, this could happen to us at any moment. And what we need to be, in my opinion, focused on, and I've been a climate organizer for 4 years. I've studied the science of this. If you want to ask me questions about it, feel free. This is not just, I'm not some hippie tree hugger. I'm telling you, this is real. The sooner we get our minds around it, the better. The last thing we need to do is cover up more pristine land. There's trees out there. If y'all been out there, it's beautiful. I've got pictures on my phone. Old growth trees. Where do we think that the animals are going to live? We cannot take every square inch. Humans now have, and between our livestock and ourselves, 96% of all wild areas, we've left 4% for nature. 4%. We can't live without that. We can't live without nature. So to continue, I mean, where does it stop? It has to stop. And I know it could be done as industrial, light industrial now, but let's say no to this zoning change. And if we get another offer, we'll deal with that then. But what we have now is a disaster, not to mention that it's my understanding that the other 55+ community isn't filling up anyway, because people go there and they say, this is gonna flood. So why do we need it? Like, that's my thing. If someone could tell me that during this meeting, why do we need another whatever it's called, housing development? If someone can give me a reason why that's more important than a scrap of Mother Nature that we have left, I would love to hear it. And thank you for taking my comment.
Thank you. Yes.
Timing?
Wait. You want to state your name and
Yes, ma'am.
address?
I actually came to this meeting with no intentions of talking, but I'm gonna have, my name's William Emery. I live in Bolton, lived here my whole life. We've got a tremendous problem of flooding in this town. Anybody who lives here knows that. I've spent 45 years in the construction industry. As a project manager, spent probably the last 20 years building industrial, commercial projects. We've done nothing but cover ground in our town for the last 10 to 15 years. Every time you build a project and cover ground, you have to allow a certain amount of ground to take water runoff. And you have to control that runoff. And when you control that runoff, you have to, by controlling the runoff, you have to kind of filter the runoff now to guarantee that it's not polluting where it's going. By that, I mean, you can't just dump water into the river. You have to filter the water before you dump it somewhere. So, example, the project down on Route 9 at Washington Street, you just can't dump it anywhere. You're going to build a retention pond, you have to filter it before it goes into a retention pond. You dump it in the river, you dump it into the tributaries of the dike. You have to filter it before you dump it in there. The dikes, you can't just dump it in the dikes. The dikes are overflowing, causing the flooding. We are out of control everywhere you look. Well, PACO plans, they're not solving the problems. They're coming to us and feeding us with like a baby with a bottle. They're not solving our problems. The people of Newcastle are being fed information and led down a path that is not going to help them. I go to city council meetings, I listen to PACO plans, just like the traffic light down at 6th and Delaware. There's nothing but problems in the future for the people of Newcastle. These plans in the heart of Newcastle are nothing but problems. Lucan's Drive, I could care less. That doesn't involve me here, other than what it's going to put and the hurt it's going to put on our municipal services, what it's going to involve out there. In here, as far as flooding, water control, that's going to be a problem. Not to mention our municipal services and et cetera down there. Fire, police, MSC, trolley barn services. That's going to be a problem. All this, I think a lot needs to be done before that. Infrastructure studies. The county demands it. Garrison, was it done there? Don't think so. Is this being done here to see traffic studies, et cetera, et cetera? I just don't see things that get done like that in the city of Newcastle. Thank you.
Thank you.
What's his name?
You said what was my name?
What's your name?
William Emery. Thank you.
Anyone else? Right. So the Placid River Edge. As I summarized, we have seen the concept plan and reviewed plus comments, but the comprehensive plan really, the change to the comprehensive plan needs to be addressed first, and that's in our code. It's also what Plus recommended from the state. So our next steps are to hold a workshop just to address that issue first. And the workshop would address the merits of changing the comprehensive plan from light industrial office park to mixed use. And AECom would be running the workshop. And so if we could just get an idea of timing from some of the commissioners, as far as the evening or weekend, I mean, not specific, but evening or weekend better. Any thoughts? I mean, for me, evening.
Evening.
Yeah,
Evening,
evening.
okay.
I'm usually good evenings after 5 or on weekends.
Right. And I talked to Chris Rogers, our city planner, today, and he thought AECom could be ready in a couple of weeks to kind of guide us through the process. So I can send around some dates and we can land on something within a couple of weeks.
I'm sorry, is this the public workshop or is this just?
It would be public, yes.
Okay, so we should, I think we should- is there a way to get feedback from the public on what would be best timeline?
You have to speak up.
Oh,
I'm sorry,
Speak up,
did you hear what I said? I'm sorry.
Yeah, didn't hear.
I said if it's a public workshop, rather than just asking commissioners, and we find a way to ask the public, you know, when they're able to attend, or is that not necessary?
That's difficult to do. I mean, you would, whatever date you pick, it will be duly advertised. You would have certain requirements to advertise for FOIA, but given it's a workshop, you may want to give a little bit more time. So, you know, most meetings are held on Monday through Thursdays in the evening. That's typical.
right. And I see there are representatives from the applicant here. Is there anything, I mean, at the workshop, I'm sure there will be applicants in attendance, but is there anything in general that we haven't seen that you would like us to know at this point in time?
Thank you, Sherwin. It's Sean Tucker for the record. We have Parker Gravel. We have, as you know, focused a lot on the concept plan over the past several months. And we've not really focused directly on the comprehensive development plan and what we believe are legitimate, sound planning reasons to amend that, given the project that my client offers. So we would welcome the opportunity, certainly, at the Planning Commission's pleasure to attend a workshop, participate in that workshop, and focus predominantly on the comp plan changes and why we believe they're logical and a positive for the town. We certainly would like to weave in aspects of the site plan, but we'd welcome the opportunity to do that. That's the Planning Commission's wishes.
Sure. And are there any high-level general questions on this particular project at this time from the commissioner?
I have a question about the process. The project is complex, has many, many, many moving parts. And a workshop that's not incredibly carefully planned with data gathering and facts and figures before we go into the workshop won't help anybody very much. And I asked for this in the last meeting as well. I'd like to see what the plan for the workshop looks like, what we're going to cover, what data we need to gather, whether that data is going to be available on that day. Over the course of time that we've had these meetings, many, many topics have come up, ranging from public safety to facilities to long-term maintenance of the property, traffic, all that kind of stuff. I don't want to go into a meeting and talk. I want to go into a meeting and look at data. So how do we know that's going to happen? Can we see the agenda? What does the plan look like? I just don't feel prepared even to have that meeting without seeing not only what that workshop would look like, but what's the larger timing and plan for what we're supposed to do. This is my ignorance here. What are we supposed to do to know to make a recommendation on this? I feel I personally have no equipment to do that. I'm a pretty smart person, but I've never done this before, but I have a lot of questions and I want to see data.
So we will be prepared with, background data appropriate for a comprehensive plan consideration. Again, we've been trying to avoid the real site-specific data because that's boiling down into the site plan and the rezoning. And we're recommending a sort of a higher altitude look at the appropriateness of this change to the land use plan in the comprehensive plan. And some of the data that you may be asking for may be site-specific, like how many trips are going to be generated from this site. And, some of that we can try to get, or we have from Plus Comments, but we're trying to, again, just take a step back and looking at the pros and cons of this type of use in that location. So if you have anything, you just mention several different data sets that we can be prepared to have. But again, I would recommend avoiding, anything specific to the site plan. For example, we will have sea level rise scenarios from the vulnerability assessment. And we'll be able to look at the plan and look at the elevations and say, the vulnerability assessment scenario number 1 has an elevation of X, and here's X on this site. And you'll be able to hopefully see that, I'm getting into site plan issues, but you'll be able to see the elevation of various sea level rise as they pertain to this site. And then we could talk about, well, what are the floodplain regulations for residential uses versus non-residential uses? And frame the pluses and minuses, in those terms. I don't think that we will have a traffic impact study for a comprehensive plan scenario, but we will have an idea of the average daily traffic emanating from the site. We will have some information about the nature of Lucan's Drive, the ownership of it. So I think some of your questions will be answered, and we will certainly be able to frame what your role is in this process. This is it's not something that we see every day, so it's not one of those rote things that it's in the ordinance and it says you are to do this. It's a rather significant, amendment to your comprehensive plan, and there's really no, given process for this type of thing, except that it has to be reviewed and approved and recommended by the comprehensive plan and passed on to council.
And this person's name is,
Excuse me.
sorry.
So I was gonna say, Chris, along those lines, can we have some kind of history of how often comprehensive plans are changed? I mean, just like in general, maybe not just our plan, not just for city of Newcastle, but just in
Yes.
general, like what the process is.
Yes.
What would factor, what would be a reason for that other than just there's a potential, project, what other reasons would be?
I was planning on having Chris Rogers with AECom, city planner. I was planning on having a sort of a comprehensive plan primer. What is a comprehensive plan? Where is it articulated in state law? And how it's implemented at the local level, some history of your plan and previous plans.
So for clarity, is our scope only to look at the comprehensive plan, or are we to also look at this project?
It's a good question. The ordinance that was read into council at first reading is a rezoning ordinance that ties the rezoning to a specific site plan. The second component of that ordinance, and I'm generalizing, mentions something to the effect, and if you approve the rezoning and the site plan, then the comprehensive plan is amended however it needs to be to make it consistent with the rezoning. We've disagreed with that approach and have recommended from the beginning that you put the comprehensive plan consideration first. And so you have a rezoning a rezoning ordinance that you will eventually have to make a recommendation on back to city council. And we're suggesting that you look at the comprehensive plan component of it first, and then that will guide your judgment on the rezoning and site plan.
And I was just gonna jump in, if you look at our city zoning code, it begins with any amendment to zoning shall be in accordance with the comprehensive plan. And plus also, if you go back and look at the comments, that was the very first comment that the comprehensive plan was amended first. And then move on to zoning.
Okay. So we are, I'm going to try to put it in words I understand. We agree in principle or don't agree in principle to the rezoning. And if we agree, then we get into this project.
I would say you agree or disagree with the comprehensive plan change.
And that's the full scope of our responsibility.
No,
Okay, so sorry for all the questions.
No.
people, But I really do not understand what we're supposed to decide.
so I don't know if you want to save it for the workshop, but real quick, the applicant requested a rezoning of this property from light industrial office park to R3 and a general commercial zoning, and they tied it specific to a concept plan. And they submitted that to the city council, and city council has to consider the rezoning request from an applicant. State law, and that ordinance says we are, and ordinances are written in the affirmative as if it's being passed. So the ordinance says we are changing the zoning of this property from X to Y in accordance with this site plan. And number two, we're amending the comprehensive plan as necessary to make it happen. That's a general synopsis of the ordinance that you have to make a recommendation on. We're suggesting that you take a closer look at the comprehensive plan merits first before you consider the rezoning. And we plan to help you do that in a workshop setting. Sort of high altitude look at the pros and cons of this type of use in this location. State law, as the chair mentioned, state law requires that all zoning be consistent with the comprehensive plan. So that's why applications for rezonings that are inconsistent with the comprehensive plan also have to amend the comprehensive plan. And the way the ordinance is written, the comprehensive plan was coming second. We're suggesting that it take primacy over the other issues, and we consider those first. And if you think that the comprehensive plan amendment has merit, then we get more into the merits of the rezoning and some site-specific issues. If you don't think the comprehensive plan change has merit, then those issues may become moot, and you would report as appropriate back to city council.
For my benefit, I would ask that we get some preview, an agenda with some detail behind it before we have this meeting, and we publish, obviously we'll publish an agenda, but maybe given some of the concerns people are expressing in the village, we give a little bit more information. But I would also ask for definitions, because you keep using words that I have trouble keeping the hierarchy straight in my mind. So maybe even a workflow that says we're doing this first, what you've chosen to do out of order to try to make it more clear. Again, I'm speaking only for myself. I see people around me nodding on the board. I have trouble following the detail of this, and I want to make sure that we don't fall into approving something at a level that then means we can't do a deeper inquiry, and that is what I am concerned about in what you're saying. So I just need it, for me, really spelled out. And I do a lot of meetings and organize a lot of meetings involving a lot of money. And I expect that in the meetings I organize, so I would expect to see that here. Thank you.
All right, any other general comments from commissioners? I mean, so I have a general question because it's something I don't understand, and I know we have a lot of representatives from the applicant here. The road, Lincoln's Drive, like who owns and maintains it? I get confused about, I mean, you have Cherry Lane to the railroad track, then you have the railroad track to Zenith, then who owns and maintains what? I'm just,
I can answer that.
all right,
This is for your record.
Yeah, Mario Jamie with Parkway Gravel, for the record. Once you cross, when you're on Lucan's Drive and you cross the railroad tracks, you are on a private road at that point. It is ultimately, so Parkway Gravel owns the road. We own Lucan's Drive, we own Steel Drive, we own
from the railroad track to the end,
to Zenith.
to Zenith.
To
Okay.
Zenith, and there's Steel Drive, we still own that, and we also own, was it Hughes Drive? We own it because we still have to top it with the surface course of asphalt. But we don't want to do that until we finish more construction in the facility. When that happens and it's blessed by the city then takes ownership of that road. So now it's private. Ultimately, it'll become the city's property.
Okay. How about from Cherry Lane to the railroad track?
That is actually technically a DelDOT road.
That's
And
done.
actually, I think Cherry Lane, even though it crosses into Newcastle, I think DelDOT still maintains that road. Actually, we pretty much do the snow plowing, to be honest with you. But it technically is under DelDOT jurisdiction.
And how about Buttonwood? That city? Okay. How about the railroad track? What kind of freight truck, is there a schedule or freight?
It's
all
freight, it's freight.
Is there a schedule or?
I don't know the answer for that. I tried to make it something up.
Oh, okay.
They get over the tracks are in the county, by the way. Towards two lane, that's the county. City lines, the railroad tracks.
Sure, Women's Sites, Sean Tucker for the record, just to throw this out, because I'm hearing, folks have questions that they'd like answers before the workshop. That's perfectly understandable. What I plan to do is go back through the recordings from our prior meetings and pull out the questions. I know several folks had very good questions. And we plan to come prepared to answer those to the extent they're at the comp plan amendment stage. And, certainly if we move forward beyond that and there's a rezoning, that will be the second opportunity for folks to drill down even deeper into the project and the site. But we plan to go through the recordings, make sure we get everybody's comments or questions so that we can prepare for the workshop. But also I would just suggest or ask that if you all have, anybody has other questions, or even if they're the same questions, if you wouldn't mind considering providing them perhaps to Mr. Rogers, he can provide them to us. That way you're flowing it through the city planner, and then we'll be ready to answer them if they're, if we can, if we have enough data. So like, for example, we're prepared to do a traffic analysis. We've already hired a traffic engineer. She's already done some preliminary work. But Mr. Rogers' point, that's a little bit, that typically comes a little bit after the comp plan amendment process. We had put everything together. We were trying to tie all three things together. We understand wanting to step back from that and going one step at a time, that's fine. But it does have those things then come out one step at a time. So I will do my best. My client will do its best to answer all the questions that you all have at the workshop. And if we can, we'll certainly explain why we can't at this stage.
Can I ask a question? Where are we with, having responses to the original plus,
I would,
comments? And I know you're waiting for like an updated version. Did that ever come?
we did get the updated version. And the only thing that has paused us responding is some of the sea level comments that were made by DENREC and some of the heights, potential worst case scenarios. We've been looking at what land could be, what fill could be added to the site without filling the floodplain necessarily. We're still looking at that, but how much soil could be added to the property outside of the floodplain to help bring up a buffer that would exceed your code. So we want to be thoughtful about that and careful about that, and most importantly, accurate about that. So that's something we've been talking about internally with our civil engineer who's here tonight, Tom Diascanis. Also, some of the modeling that was used by DENREC is not supposed to be used for site-specific analysis, we've learned. And so we want to respond thoughtfully to that when we respond to DENREC. As some of you probably know, or maybe all of you know, DENREC uses the bathtub model for sea level rise, and that model is not recommended for site-specific modeling. So we wanted to look at that carefully because we want to be as accurate as we can be in offering a height, an ultimate, finished floor for the units. And as you all know, the sea level rise issue is complicated. And it's new to me, very frank. I mean, I've been a zoning attorney for 20 years. It's the first time I've been confronted with a sea level rise situation. So we want to be very careful in how we respond to that, and most importantly, accurate. So I would anticipate in the next 1 or 2 weeks, we will
Okay,
get
so
that.
likely before we
Yes.
plan this workshop.
Yes, I will represent you. We will get that out before the workshop, as long as we have 2 or 3 weeks.
I think that would be
it sounds like.
helpful to understand like your
Sure.
perspective and your points in regards to the comments. In
Sure.
order to, present that to the public at the workshop.
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. And again, I apologize for taking a little bit longer than we had expected. They did remove the comment from DEMA though. It's not appropriate. I think we're close.
And which comment was that?
There was a comment from DEMA about the idea that any land adjacent to the floodplain should not be developed. And of course, that would be thousands of acres in the state outside of the floodplain. And certainly that would be a compensable thing if state government decided that no land adjacent to the floodplain could be developed. That could be 5 acres, that could be thousands of acres as you go south. And even though today lawfully under federal law, under state law, under city law, that can be developed under your zoning, then that would certainly constitute a taking, and somebody would have to pay for that. And so I reached out to the state about that issue, particularly to the Office of State Planning, and pointed that out, that was a comment under the comment section. It wasn't a code requirement, and pointed that out, that if that is going to be the state's position, then somebody's going to have to start compensating people and pay for their land if they're going to take it when it's not regulated in that regard. And so I think that was the first time DEMA may have commented in that regard. I'm not sure, but it certainly caught my eye as a land use attorney from a constitutional standpoint. So that was removed. And we also, I think they used the county standard for riparian buffers, and we also asked them to remove that. I can't remember if that was removed or not.
The 100 feet versus 10 feet.
Yes, I think that's, it's 100 feet at the county level. They just reference generically the county rules instead of your rules. It's your local rules that apply here, not the Newcastle County's rules. So I think that was just a typo. It was probably a leftover from another plus comment letter they had done. We asked them to clean that up as well. I just don't know whether they did that second part yet or not.
All right, any other questions or comments?
Madam Chairman, are we permitted to be engaged in the process of setting up this workshop, or do we just be recipients to this workshop? Okay. I'd like to work with you, because I think we need visuals to explain what's happening. I think we need terms of reference.
In terms of what?
Terms of reference, what we're talking about here. We need to have an order of it, how it's all going to happen, how we're going to safeguard everybody's interests on all sides through that process. Because right now it's just a black hole to me. I don't get it. So I'm also really good at PowerPoint. So, and I'm a pretty clear thinker, so I volunteer myself to help with that.
Chris, how far in advance do you think we would have like an agenda and a plan for this before the actual meeting? So that we can go through and just make sure that we are versed in what we need to be as far as the comprehensive plan.
I mean, I'll work with the chair. We're certainly not gonna,
Like the weekend's not enough for me.
Right, I
Yes,
understand. I
yes.
know a lot of times we get things late, and it's because things come in late.
Yes.
They come in right before a meeting.
you know, I'm gonna say, you know, a week. So
Okay.
it's not something that you're gonna get on a Friday. But I will also say that given the nature of how comprehensive plans are created, you know, workshops are also, comprehensive plans are often, the initial workshops of a plan are very organic and built from the ground up. I appreciate the comments that you're making about the information that you need ahead of time. But I know this is very site specific. The comprehensive plans are very high altitude and, you know, but noted, we will gather the necessary information to make it go as smoothly as possible. Get it to you in advance of your meeting.
All right, anything else before we move on to the next project?
Sure, sure. If you'd like me, it's the board's pleasure. I know there were some getting comments from the public. If you'd like me to respond to any of them, happy to do that briefly at this time if you'd like. If you prefer that for the workshop, I can wait until the workshop.
I think good to go ahead and
Okay.
respond.
Thank you, Chair. There were a few comments, as you all know, before we started, and I just would like to address each one briefly, if I may. The first speaker talked about stopping it. Let's stop it. As we discussed here today briefly, the land is already zoned for development. One of the logical uses is for a warehouse type facility. That is the market right now that we're seeing across northern Newcastle County. Certainly that can be built under the code, subject to your setbacks and your height and other regulations. But that is one viable use for the property that's permitted. There's not a moratorium on today. This application has come in ahead of any moratorium if there were one. So I would just respectfully say for folks who think stopping a mixed-use project stops development of the site, that's not the situation. The land has been vacant for a long period of time. It is zoned industrial for development, or POI, I think, or IOP, excuse me, is the designation. So the reality is the land is earmarked for development and at some point will be. We want to develop it certainly in a responsible way, in a code compliant way. But the idea of just stopping all development, that would require a moratorium, and that would not be applicable, in my opinion, to projects and applications that have already been submitted. Pushing the project was also a phrase that was used. I don't think I've been associated with a project in 20 years that we have moved so slowly with. We've been to you 3 times now, I think at least maybe 4 times, to hear from the public and to hear comments and hear from you. And we're still just getting started. So there's nobody, quote unquote, pushing the project on the development end, nor is the city pushing the project. I think the city has really been clear to us that they want to take time, all of you want to take time to carefully look at this and examine it. And you should be applauded for that, because that does make sense. Time is something that, you know, markets can change and certainly properties can go up or down in value because of that. But I think a thorough look at a project of this scale makes perfect sense. And for those in the room who may not know this, we are moving, I would say, close to a snail's pace, and that's fine. That's necessary so people are comfortable as they can be. For those who want no development, no matter how fast or slow we move, it's probably not going to change their mind about this project. But for those who don't know, we are moving slowly, and that was at the request of the city, and my client agreed to do that. Somebody used the word Lucan's Drive as a disaster. Disaster. I checked with my client. while we started, and they're not aware of any instance where there has been flooding or Lukens that has put any of these existing sites underwater, parking lots underwater. I suspect maybe during one of the brushes we've received from hurricanes over the year, maybe, but there is no history of flooding on Lukens or quote unquote disaster type scenarios that we have seen. Having said that, we do want to look at this carefully. Tom Diascanis, who's here, is our engineer. He's looked at the flood plain maps, the updated FEMA maps, or at least the most current ones. We're looking at DENREC's comments again very carefully, and I will volunteer that we plan, if this project moves forward, which we hope it will, to build significantly above where the current code would require in the city. So we are sensitive to the sea level rise issue. We're trying to be careful and responsible in how to address that, and we are prepared to offer the city code plus. That would not be required if it was built under its existing zoning. We'd only have to meet code. There was concerns about traffic. We've heard them, and I hear that on every project. That's a very common thing we get, right? And I'm sure it's no surprise to all of you hearing land use applications. We have hired a traffic engineer to study this. She has already begun her work, and we'll know the results of that shortly. That typically would come with a site plan and not with a comp plan change, but I'll push to get as much data from her as we can before any comp plan workshop, so we can share that for folks that are interested in that. But it is, many of you probably know, if not all of you, these studies come down to a level of service number that DelDOT uses. In fact, most DOTs across the country use it, and we're going to follow those. In the plus comments, DelDOT indicated it did not have jurisdiction over this site. We are going to nevertheless model a DelDOT traffic study and look at what improvements would be required and make improvements that are necessary as part of our application. Again, would not happen, in our opinion, based on what DelDOT has said, that is, they don't have jurisdiction, and from reading the code, we don't see a traffic study requirement if we developed it under its industrial zoning. Want to make those quick points, and then I guess lastly, there's a concern about water quality. Certainly, DENREC regulates stormwater management. We have to comply with all of DENREC's rules and city codes on how we drain the site. So that, right now, obviously, there's nothing on the site. It's a vacant site, but we would have to offset impervious cover. We would have to manage the water in terms of quality and quantity. Because we're along the river, we get a lot more flexibility with the drainage volume, because it's not going across other people's properties in most instances, but quality is certainly something we will have to manage. So we're still really at the front of the process. And because the Planning Commission has asked that we step this one step at a time, we have even more of a process in front of us. Essentially, as I understand it from talking to the city solicitor and Mr. Rogers, we would first be looking at the comprehensive plan amendment only, and then only if that is ultimately recommended and blessed by city council, again, as they vote, as you know, on the final decision, would we move to the second step, which would be the rezoning and site plan. So we're still at the apron, if you will, of this process, and we're not rushing anything. And I just want to reassure the public of that, so that there's no misunderstanding about how fast we're moving. And lastly, and I promise I'll finish up with this, I was not at the last meeting because of a conflict. I understand that somebody did allege that Parkway Gravel has previously illegally filled wetlands at River Bend. That is not true. My client has never been found to illegally fill wetlands. My client has never been charged with illegally filling wetlands. I looked into it after I heard about that being stated publicly. There was somebody that was found responsible for that. There was somebody that was criminally charged for doing that. It was not Parkway Gravel. It was not my client. I just want everybody to know that, because I think that's important. I like to call balls and strikes, and that was definitely, a foul ball. So I wanted to clear that up for the record. Thank you.
All right, are we ready to move on? Thank you. 427 West 7th Street. So this project is mixed use in our comprehensive plan. and it is zoned as downtown gateway. However, the downtown gateway code specifies that multifamily and or mixed use developments are permitted by special exception. So that means that we can recommend some additional studies, but this needs to go to the Board of Adjustment. But we don't have to deal with the comp plan, and the zoning allows for this by special exception. So it looks like we're going to get a preview. We all received small copies of, I think it was called a site plan, but I think we're looking at it more as a concept plan. And so maybe you can enlighten us, looks like the applicants here to enlighten us with the plan.
Thank you very much. Very appreciate it. My name is Rob Snowberger. For the record, I'm principal of 9SBC. And I'd like to start by, first of all, thank you all very much for this opportunity to be here. We have worked on this project for about 3 years now, trying to take the cues and the direction from this commission, as well as the intent of the downtown gateway district or the downtown gateway zoning. We are hired by a local business owner, Amish Patel, and his family, who owns the site. And they've been looking to see what they can do with this zoning to bring a really wonderful project to Newcastle. A little bit of background on myself, and then I'll introduce my principals. Like I said, I'm Tom Snowberger, and I'm a native Delawarean. I've grown up here my entire life. The only time that I left Wilmington in this area was to go to college and to go to Iraq, so 2 tours as a Navy SEAL. I played football at St. Peter's up the street when I was in CYO age in 6th grade. So I know Newcastle very well, and my best friend lives on Clayton Street. And so 9SVC stands for 9th Street Development Company. Most of my colleagues came from the Gene Pullen Group, where we worked for several years. I was vice president of development for the Gene Pullen Group from 2014 to 2018. I was responsible for all the downtown development, whether it be apartment buildings or, more importantly to this project, the historic renovations that Eugene Pullen has been doing on Market Street in Wilmington. When Amish and the Patel family was looking for a developer for this site, they wanted to choose a group who had extensive historic renovation experience. So that we could keep in character and try to build something new that would keep in character with what Old Newcastle has that is so special. And we think that we hope what we're presenting tonight is that. My team is Rob Herrera sitting in the front with a blue jacket. He's an architect. He's in-house, one of our principals. Steve Weathers is our construction senior manager and also in charge of everything construction side of our company. And Dave Ranier is our other principal, and he is in charge of finance. So what we're going to present here tonight, this is the site, 427 West 7th Street. This is the site as it sits today. The Garrison has been mentioned a few times. It is this site over here. As you can see, we have some views to the water back here, and you have a current commercial site right there on Amish's current business by the. And what we plan to do, here's just an overview before I introduce our civil engineer. This is 7th Street. Looking. This is the same view that you're seeing on 7th Street project. This is what we intend to build. And this was done after, like I said, about 3 years of study, looking at not only the wetland impact, but also something that would be financeable, as well as something that kept in line with the gateway zoning, as well as the notes taken from this very commission on what wanted to be seen there in terms of mixed use, including retail on the ground floor, as well as apartments above to create more walkable traffic for businesses on Delaware Street. And we're really excited to present this project, and hopefully as we look at questions, you get more of a feel for what the project's going to be. And so I'd like to introduce Bill, who's going to go through the project itself and the site plan. He's our civil engineer for Mid-Atlantic.
All right, my name's Bill Wemling from Mid-Atlantic. I've worked in Delaware since I took over in 95. I've been down here, different firm, new office for different. So we were hired by non-SD, Ministry of Development, come up with a concept for about 4.26 acre site that's currently developed to here with macadam parking. There's a liquor store in the front, and there's an extension of this building here that goes onto the site. So that at some point in the past, it was subdivided through the center of the building, right? Or not the center, but through the old portion of the building, and the new portion of the building was subdivided and this new property. Frontage on, very limited frontage on 7th Street. There's an existing pump station that is leased by the,
Your hand is just blocking.
it's leased by the county, Newcastle County, and this piece here, the small piece, is owned by the city of Newcastle. There's a wetlands to the Delaware River, call it the south, or, yeah, let's call it the south side. And we had watershed, or clients had watershed, you could go out and delineate the wetlands out there. They've already had preliminary jurisdictional determination, so we have a limit of what we can do. So, the entire site exists in the floodplain. Our intent is to raise it up to 2 foot above. Right now, what elevation this side is, what elevation this side, and this side is. So we're basically saying we're going to keep the floor elevation at a minimum. We have a single driveway design through the center of the site. We've worked with, I guess, the fire chief and used a design vehicle for getting into and out of the site. We have provided a second emergency access 15-foot wide along the side of the building. And we submitted that, but worked with several different renditions of this, and he was comfortable with this final product before we submitted to the city. 152 units in 2 buildings. This is the first building. This is the second building. And basically, there's under first story parking. So the building is basically constructed as podium. So it's almost all parking. There's a couple of podiums that come down, give access to the upper floors. And this is a retail section. And there's stairways that go down to the back. This is all parking, and all the parking is we have 152 units and roughly 3,000 square foot of retail for most of the first floor. Parking, we're currently at 228 total spaces. Okay, speaking with Mr. Bergstrom, we had worked on using the Newcastle County code of allowing compact spaces. So we have some compact spaces in here, but mostly full-size spaces for the site. With stormwater management, right now, almost half the site is the location of it being on the river, rate control, which is the buying of water, because the closer you are to the river, better it is to release it early, not later, because you offset the peak coming from further up the river. But we are proposing water quality. We intend to pick up this area here and use some mechanical means that are approved by DENREC to treat the water quality for this. Roof water is considered clean water. We plan on discharging that directly. And we have provided some biofiltration areas here for some surface runoff. Landscaping in front, on the back of this area, and between the buildings, we propose some landscaping in Greens. That's a general overview. Is there any other questions? One of the constraints of the site is that we do have walls. You have to bring the site up between 6 and 7 feet out of the floodplain. Okay, so there is a wall along the perimeter on both sides and along the rear to protect the wetlands, and along the side over here just to build the site up. And that wall, due to the need to use this as an emergency access, we have basically contemplating a structural wall. And then one of the comments was contemplating a non-structural, more of a natural stone or something, not just a big concrete wall along the waterfront. We don't have that design yet, but we have marine engineering in-house. We talked to them about how we protect the back of the building. You know, so something like stone or riprap or big ones would be Allow vegetation. There's mechanicals for this building that through here, we're proposing, electrical transformer. Patio in the front, I think it may one of them becoming bigger, depends on what the use here. But I mean, this would be a patio for, sitting outside for the residents. We're keeping the sidewalk along the front, and then we're extending it to the side where it's possible to do that. Most of the material underneath the building, people can walk around.
I can do some more renderings here. I know that it's not. It's screen, but just use the screen. Old school with the pictures
I'm
here.
sorry, where's your summit?
Down here.
So this is a picture with the pump station here to the right, looking at the front of the building again. This is along 7th Street. You can see building 1, the start of building 2. Looking at this view from right here. Another similar view taken from the other side of 7th Street. And at the pump station and from 7th Street.
And where is the Garrison?
It's to the right.
How far?
It's adjacent, it's right next to us.
Contiguous here. This is common property line between the Garrison and the Sacramento.
You can see,
South or west side. No, channel goes through, no, not at all.
this is a picture from 7th Street. If you look on the north side of building 1, so you can see that emergency second means of a 50-foot wide that the fire marshal requested. As opposed to the main entrance. Found it? Starting with this view, looking this direction at the existing metal structure that's there, which is right there. So this is the parking that you're looking at here. So this is the view from this way. Specifically, that's how this building is. So this is the overall picture. We're happy to continue to shift through them for duration of the question. And then here's just a picture of some of the interiors and the amenities that we're going for, which we think is commensurate with what the downtown gateway district is supposed to be for. We think that this was the type of amenity package that would ultimately attract folks to come to the Old Newcastle, to live here and to work and shop here. And I think that this is the right area of town to be able to do that based on the comments and again, the zoning that changed from industrial to gateway. And the type of work that we have done and we can demonstrate through our portfolio. And again, like I said, we take great pride in our work and in our ability to be able to fit in and keep the characteristics of the historic nature properties. That's the core business of what we do. We've done about a dozen historic renovations in downtown Wilmington, and we have done more than that when it comes to the work we've done with Virginia Waltree in the past. So I think that there was a list of questions that you guys have raised, and I don't know if Bill, you want to walk through those directly. Let's talk about the income letter.
Oh, yeah.
How do you want to deal with that letter? Do you want to do one of them, or read them out loud and then address them, or?
Well, I was actually going to turn it over to our city planner, Chris, who wrote the letter.
Can I ask one quick question though,
Yes.
just from my own understanding? So the second building that goes along the back,
Yes.
is that currently all asphalt or would that be building into some of the land that's currently there?
Right now, there's almost 50% impervious on the side, going up to 75. So there's some additional land that's being disturbed and added asphalt. But again, I understand that we're covering it, but I mean, roof is technically clean water. So we're taking the rest of the site and treating it so that
Site racks that aren't being treated today will be treated in the future. So in all, we're actually, from a water quality standpoint, improving the site.
So Chris Rogers from the Thomas City Planner put together some of the considerations for this project. So why don't you?
Thank you. Maybe I would suggest at least I go through the procedural administrative to make
Sure,
sure
yes.
that we understand our role here tonight. And then the technical comments speak for themselves, and maybe the applicant's engineer could just address the technical comments if that's okay, instead of me saying them all and then them having to address them. But I certainly want to address the procedural administrative. So based on our letter dated August 24th to Mr. Barthel, procedural administrative, per ordinance 507, which revised the zoning ordinance about 5 years ago. Can somebody ask those gentlemen to step outside?
Close the door.
Yeah, we shouldn't close the door. Sorry, George. I'm sorry. It's always a map, open doors, closed doors. Thank you. Per that ordinance, multifamily developments and or mixed-use developments in the DG zone are permitted by special exception following a review and a recommendation by the planning commission. So your role here tonight is to review this plan and make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment, who has the final say on special exceptions. At the same time, you are also going to be, if it is approved as a special exception, you're also going to be the land use authority that will be reviewing the site plan. So we're making a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment on the merits of the special exception. And then if it's approved by the board, it's going to come back to you as a site plan. So number two, beyond giving a positive or negative recommendation on the planning commission can recommend additional conditions and considerations, studies, etc., in furtherance of establishing the application's consistency with the criteria of all special exceptions. So I attached ordinance 534, which was recently adopted, which provides the criteria for all special exceptions. And those are pretty high level, no adverse impact on, spirit and purpose and intent of the comprehensive plan, not substantially injure or detract from neighboring property. So those are very typical special exception criteria that apply to all special exceptions. We would recommend that after the review here tonight and prior to the review by the Board of Adjustment of the special exception, that the plan be submitted to PLUS. We would recommend that the applicant not proceed to the Board of Adjustment until PLUS comments are received in writing and responses provided by the applicant. Number 6, what I was alluding to earlier, if the special exception is approved by the Board of Adjustment, we would recommend that a full site plan be resubmitted to the Planning Commission for review and approval in accordance with ordinance 535, which was also recently adopted, which specifies the contents of a site plan and the procedures. So if it's approved by the Board of Adjustment as a special exception, you'll get a full-blown site plan that has much more detailed information regarding grading, stormwater management, water, sewer, landscaping, some more architectural elevations to confirm its consistency with the DG zone. But that's if it's approved by the Board of Adjustment. Also keep in mind that the Board of Adjustment can set conditions to their approval of the special exception. So you would see those, you would get the site plan to confirm compliance with normal regulations and confirm compliance with any special conditions established by the Board of Adjustment. Also, the subject plan notes the need for four zoning variances. Technically, the zoning ordinance does not require a recommendation from the Planning Commission to the Board of Adjustment on variances, but discussion of those variances may arise as part of your normal review here tonight. And I'll defer to the Planning Commission whether you want me to go over these or just have the applicant take it from here and state how they understand or don't understand the comment or how to address it.
Are you prepared to address, so you've already had a copy of this?
Yes, we have.
All right. Yeah. Be reasonable.
Just wanna
Oh, yeah.
What are the board zoning variances that were?
No, I don't think it is.
One of the comments gets into it. In the DG zone, building footprint shall not exceed 40,000 square feet. I don't have it here in front of me, but their building footprint exceeds 40,000 square feet. Minimum area for proposed parking space. I think that's alluding to some compact spaces that your ordinance does not currently allow for. Your ordinance requires a 9 by 18 parking space dimension, which is very standard for old school standard. And I guess they're going to be asking for a certain amount of compact, 35 compact spaces that I guess are less than 9 by 18. I think they're requesting a slight reduction in the number of required spaces and also in the number of loading spaces that are required and provided technically by your ordinance.
There's also reference to density equates to approximately 36 units per. As mixed use, so in the DG code, density equates to approximately 36 units per acre. With this project, it's 152 units. Do I have that right?
Yeah, I figured the applicant would get into that. That's the first comment, first technical comment, that there appears to be a
So the
need for another
density
variance.
is more than what's specified in the DG code.
Madam Chairman, can I just ask, are we being expected to vote on this tonight after looking at this? I just don't know what's happening.
Your role is to make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment.
Tonight?
Yes,
Okay,
if you,
If we're prepared to do that.
okay. Thanks. Yeah, sorry, I have to ask these basic things, but I don't get it. So I need help. Thank you.
So
All right.
you want to start with the
Sure.
technical comments?
Sure.
All right, first comment is the applicant and planning commission should discuss section 230-21.1B2 of the ordinance for mixed use in the DG zone, which requires such use to be considered as special exceptions, and with further states for mixed use, a mix of uses in a single building or group of buildings with first floor non-residential uses as described herein, and office or multifamily residential on the upper floors, residential density on the upper floors. Density of upper floor residential uses in a mixed-use building shall not exceed 10 units per acre. Residential uses shall have a private access separate from that of the commercial area. So with the development of it, originally we had not added the retail section on the first floor, which is going to be considered an amenity area, which in our understanding and interpretation of code does not set a maximum density for residential in DG. So once you bring in the retail, the maximum density is there. Our understanding that the unit count for this building is what makes it feasible to construct the building, because there's so much earthwork and demolition and everything. that there is a demand for a higher density project. So we have complied with private access for all the residential, it's not part of the commercial. Have outside access to the commercial. And really, to us, the driving factor for several of these variances is really the addition of it bumps the makes it a loading space requirement because it's 3,000 instead of 2,500. If we reduce it to 2,500, we wouldn't need the loading space. It adds a few more parking, I think 13 more parking spaces that are required, but we have 228 that are required for the parking. We figure that they can share use during the day when the retail is more busy than the parking.
No, I just think that that's a really important point. 3 of the 4 variances that we'll be seeking are completely tied to the fact that we have 3,000 square feet of commercial space. And that's based off of, the project when the Garrison came through was asked to have commercial fronting on 7th Street. So if this was a pure residential building, we would not have this 10 units per acre, which is where you get the 36 from, it's 3.6 acres. So that's where you get the 36 units is simply because we have this small retail frontage. We thought that that was in keeping with the downtown gateway. We thought that that was the intent of the gateway. And so we wanted to add it there, not to mention the fact that there's already an existing business that serves the community and above the standards. In addition, their loading dock, same exact thing. We didn't have 3,000 square feet, but at 2,500 square feet, we would not need a loading dock. That's the second variance. And the third variance is the parking spaces. Effectively, when we're asking for reduction in parking spaces, we're asking for reduction in the parking space that serve the commercial, simply because it creates a need for not only commercial spaces, but also residential spaces. So that's what we're asking for. So essentially, if the variance, if the ZBA says no, then we could just get rid of that and bring it back to the amenity space, and it would be completely allowable in those first 3 points. So hopefully, this is us and trying to keep with what the community has said they want there with the DG zoning. And hopefully, with the small amount of frontage this site has on 7th Street, we're using it to the maximum ability to have an actual retail space. As you can see, the site gets very large in the back, which is where most of the construction work is. But along 7th Street, where you can see we have access and we have a retail space. So that's the only frontage along 7th Street we have to work. So I just wanted to make sure that the 4 variances were put into context with the comment about.
The next question. So the retail space is just going to still be the liquor store? Is that what you're saying? The retail space is just going to be the liquor store?
So as in Delaware liquor license law, when the store closes, they're going to need to ask for a special, delayance of their liquor license. Because if you close down for more than 14 days, technically the license goes away. So Amrish and his family are going to have to decide if they have to move to a separate location and come back. But ultimately, yes, they would like to stay in the retail space as a tenant, if that's feasible by Delaware liquor license. Of course, really nice fit out.
If I could add about to what the applicant said about the retail, they're right. The DG zone stems from the 2009 comprehensive plan that called for a land use district on your southern and northern gateways. And it spelled out in the 2009 plan, and it was carried forth in the 2019 plan as a recognition of the zone. So the DG zone stems from the 2009 comprehensive plan that calls for multifamily and a mixed use at the gateways of the city to activate those areas that were perceived to be underutilized in the 2009 plan. So while there is a density cap for true mixed use, there's no density cap for pure multifamily. We're not quite sure why it was written that way, the actual code. The intent of the comprehensive plan is to have a mixed use. So all other issues aside, the fact that there is retail use on the first floor here it's consistent with the comprehensive plan. Now, it will be up to the Board of Adjustment to determine whether or not that rises to the level of granting a variance. From a planning perspective, I would hope that you would continue to ask for the variance for the density in pursuit of the first floor retail and not just give it up as a gym or if they made that an accessory amenity to the multifamily, a gymnasium or a lounge, then the density of 10 units per acre would go away. And that really doesn't make any sense, given the intent of this comprehensive plan, land use district and the zoning. That's it. Thank you.
And just since I'm on the topic of addressing the variances, just since it was asked, the main variance is for the building footprint, which is 40,000 square feet. We're at 52. And the reason for that is simply because of the earthwork that needs to be done to raise this site, as been mentioned many times. The Garrison had to do it, and then there's also the height restrictions of the building. So you can't just have a 40,000 square foot building and go straight up and build a high rise. You have to stay within a certain height restriction. And so with that comes the request to have an additional square footage of building space that is about $20,000 per unit to raise the site. And that's very expensive. So this is, as I said, this is actually the review plan that we originally had after working with the city manager and the fire marshal's office. So this is a plan that is not only, hopefully keeping the plan and the gateway district. Hopefully that is not a variance that is too far to ask for. And ultimately, it's in the back of the site where a lot of that square footage, that additional square footage is located. And also, just the feasibility and financing. That is what we have.
And do you want to clarify that no wetlands will be built?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, there are some wetlands, the fringe area, which Watershed Eco basically said, quality wetlands, and they are going to be built. It's going to be less than a half an inch, but going to be covered under a general permit, not an individual permit. But the 404 line, which is the regulated line, is not going to be that. It's going around the site, all the way around. Nothing much.
There's historical questions here, because I wasn't on the committee time. With the Garrison, first of all, do you know what the occupancy is of the Garrison right now? Is it full capacity right now?
I don't know.
Okay, just curious.
I-
Okay. Did they have similar variances that they requested, and do we need to go through this? I mean, what I'm saying is, I don't know if we can, I just want to be consistent
Mhm.
in our approach and in our thought process. So, I just want to take that into account as well. I mean, they're right next to each other, similar concept, so.
You're a little bit of a disadvantage. Number one, relative to the variances, I wouldn't worry about the variances because that's a true Board of Adjustment issue. And I didn't review the Garrison personally, but our staff did, but I wasn't involved. Secondly, most importantly, when the Garrison was built, multifamily / mixed use was permitted by right. Since that time, that means that they did not need to go to the Board of Adjustment for a special exception. The city about 5 years ago amended the zoning ordinance to require to only allow mixed use multifamily in the DG as a special exception. So the Garrison was approved solely by the Planning Commission. So that's what's called, I always put air quotes, by right. There's still a lot of conditions that have to be met. But it didn't need to go to the Board of Adjustment for a special exception. So your role was different in the beginning of the Garrison. And they did obviously fill, so it's very similar. The floodplain requirements are the same. First floor elevation has to be raised a certain amount above the floodplain elevation. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I had a quick comment on that. My understanding is that
This
is Rob Pereira on the record. My understanding is that they built it as amenity space and then changed it to retail somewhere in the middle of the process. But we were told that.
I did look at some of our Actually, I did look at that issue. I wanted to see if that density issue was raised at the Garrison. So I believe at the Garrison, the 10 units per acre issue was raised. They said we're going to make it an amenity space, and the density issue went away during the plan review process. I can't speak for what it is today, but that's what I saw in our review. Same issue was, that's why I wanted to bring it to the applicant's attention. Just don't, I would recommend from a planning perspective, just don't throw it away easily and say, "Oh, we'll call them," and it's up to you and the Board of Adjustment. But that's what the Garrison did. They said we're going to make it an apartment amenity. It's not going to be retail.
So it's not our call at this point. Not our call.
What? To the extent that, if you think this is too many units for the site, then you can make that part of your special exception recommendation. But not, and that's what I was trying to say in that comment. So that is one of the variances that they're requesting. You technically don't have a role in variances, but you have a role in making a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment as to the appropriateness of this. So,
Yeah, I'll speak back now.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
I did hear you mention the height of the building. Is it within the 45 feet, including the parking?
Yeah, I guess the next, number 2 was the square footage. Number 3 was the DG zone of 45 feet. And currently, we have a design of 45 feet. I guess there's some discussion of the floodplain line. And there's a possibility to make an optimal building that would go from the floodplain to 47, right? So that's something that we would prefer not to do, but we're again in concept, so.
Can I ask a question? Because I know that lot in particular gets a lot of flooding currently in the parking area. So is this then going to increase raise up the parking and stuff as well? So that
Everything
would,
above the floodplain by at least a foot, yes.
okay. And then the adjacent properties are still going to be at the same level though, correct? So
You can't touch them, yes.
we'd have to be cautious of like the runoff from that, I guess, not increasing the flooding in that particular area then, correct?
Correct. The way we have it conceptually designed is everything goes to the middle, goes to the back of the property through here, and then it goes into the river, and that's it.
So it'll be graded that way.
It's almost a flat area, so we're gonna have to do some pretty grading to get everything to go into a system that we can control, yes.
In 1830, there was a study made of Newcastle called the Latrobe Study, which raised historic Newcastle along the, what was Orange Street at the time, it's now 3rd Street, by a foot, for the very same reasons that we're talking about here. So this has been something that people have done for a long time. So for the benefit of people, that's not a new idea in our low line town.
Number of design standards in the DG zone for section 230-21.1.g. Architectural plans should be submitted prior to review by the Board of Adjustment, demonstrating general compliance with and commitment to said standards. Shortening that up a little bit, but we did provide architectural renderings, interior, just to show the flavor of the building.
If I could add, sorry, is that it for, I didn't mean to interrupt you if you were explaining. That's one of the unique features of the DG zone is that it goes beyond your typical zoning requirements of setbacks and height and parking. And for example, one of the design standards that is in that section that comment refers to All primary building entrances shall be accentuated. Entrance accentuations may include recessed or protruding entrances and or the use of canopies, porticos, or overhangs. So this is the, you get into architectural design standards, obviously in the historic district, but these are architectural design standards outside of the historic district, and that's unique to this zone. So this comment is just asking that the applicant provide enough information to the Board of Adjustment that shows their adherence to these guidelines and makes a commitment to the more specific guidelines that, can't be reflected in these type of conceptual building elevations.
We're going to number 5. AECom recommends that a traffic impact study be prepared and reviewed by DelDOT in the city prior to the Board of Adjustment's consideration of respect to section. The city should take part of the initial scoping meeting. We do have a traffic engineer on standby. Started on the, and a lot of the data is already done, but it has not started on the actual preliminary work, so. Here's number 6, it appears that the one-story metal and masonry office and garage buildings on adjacent parcel 2A2, which is this building right here, is proposed to be partitioned along the lot line. The applicant and the planning commission should discuss this in more detail. As I understand, this is the original building that was built for, I guess this was one property at one point in time. This was the original building. There is a party wall along this line here where the property line is, and everything on this side of it was an addition that was done. So this could be lopped off and this can still stand as its own building. That's our understanding.
It's very difficult to see it in this drawing. It looks like, I can see that, that's not the problem. It looks like the building continues beyond that corner on the.
So this is the corner of the building here.
Right, I see that. That's not what I'm looking at. Here, it looks as though this building goes here, and that doesn't appear here. Is that the same corner? Is that corner?
This is.
That's a shed.
It's this right here.
Oh.
And then there is this actually turns,
Right, I
which
get
is this,
that.
and goes up, and that's just.
It's a shed.
Can I write on it?
It's a shed.
This
That's
looks
why
like
you
it
can't see
goes, like this whole part of this building is unaccounted for in this picture. That's my only point.
Steve, what do you mean by it's a shed?
It's lower.
It's a low shed.
So you're saying it's below the black line?
Yes.
It's below the fence line, is why you cannot see it from this drawing. Because
Okay.
it's a lower elevation shed.
All right, it doesn't look that way from the way that thing, and that confounded me when I was looking at it before. Absolutely.
Fair enough. Thank you.
And number 7 is through a partnership with Denmark for vulnerability assessment. To evaluate flooding issues in the city, including the impacts of sea level rise and coastal flooding. We have formed the Sea Level Rise Task Force to research existing information concerning the impact of sea level rise in the city of Newcastle and prepare remediation recommendations. After they wish to be prepared to discuss the various sea rise scenarios discussed in the plan and the related impacts on the floodplain with related components of the subject development plan, including to, but not limited to, the proposed non-structural retaining wall, first floor elevations, freeboard emergency access. So we know that 7th Street is below the floodplain today. We're raising our entire site out of the floodplain. These walls along the side will be, the tops will be above the floodplain. Okay, by 1.5 to 2 foot. Back wall, we haven't really gotten into a firm design yet, but again, we finally do something more natural, but again, raising the site up, because we can't have the flood elevation anywhere along the building side, so it has to be, the entire site has to come out of the floodplain. It's the only thing we're not touching, which is still part of the property, is this pump house, and if there's a lease on this area right here that is staying exactly the way it is today. We built and designed everything, or contemplate designing everything outside of that leased area, so not to touch it, not to disturb anything, and not to have to require permission from anybody else to do that work. Where we come back to grade in this area and in this area, we have a relatively steep, I think it's 8% driveway to get the site up out of the footprint as quickly as we can. The sea rise, I think it's 2,100 is an additional 5 feet over. And I think 2050 is, I think 2 feet, right? So at 2050, we're still at the floodplain with the site. And then again, it depends when this side of the building is a foot over, this side of the building is at. So I mean, you can't like realistically, it doesn't jump a foot like halfway through here. There's somewhere between 9 and 10. This is where we be. Everything we have is at 12. To go to 15 or 14, everything would have to come up. The driveway would become considerably steeper. So at some point, my understanding is that DelDOT is reviewing 7th Street and some possible alternatives, which would probably be raising the thing up. So if that happened, we would be okay. But I think until that happens, we just flatten this driveway out and match what they're doing out here, and they could reconstruct that and make it work. If we raise the building up to 15, then we wouldn't make it on height. Okay, we would have a problem with that. Other than that, it's just a massive amount of additional earthwork to bring it. And until this, is raised up above it, there's some relative impact, and it doesn't make any difference. There's no residential on the first floor whatsoever. Okay, no,
How about the commercial?
that would be on the first floor, yes.
Is there electrical?
There's some mechanical here, yes. We could even raise the mechanical, the electric, the switchboard inside as well. 2100. So make sure we can do that without a problem.
So just to understand, so when you said 2050, so by 2050, it would be in a flood zone again. So in
It would
20,
be. At
so
the-
in 28 years, that's
at-
not,
at the-
If we're lucky, if
at
we're
the
real
flood
lucky,
elevation, At the projected flow elevation.
they're 10 feet above right now in Mississippi,
Okay, so
right now.
again, I mean, it's just more earthwork. Raising it up, a bigger island today. 50 years or whatever, so it's changed.
What would you project as the lifespan for a project like this?
That would be
Very long.
A very long time. I'm just asking the question in terms of sea level rise projection. Lifespan of a building and residence.
Oh, 100%. I think, not only, do we care about that, obviously, as a project sponsor, but the bank, lending to it, 40-year amortization schedule. This is a project that's financed. This is a project that not only has passed the local banking standards, but also bank question is the federal insurance from HUD, and they've done a study, the most stringent standards you can have, and that they have approved this project to the next phase, which is construction cost estimates. So while that doesn't impact the local, liking the project or not, based on, the most important this level, from a federal level, they're saying that's easy. And that's what the banks do. So that's not only just from our financial standpoint. but also Of
and
course, the impact of the 10-foot sea rise on other properties, just our property, I think is much more. Sea level rise.
well, we don't want to add to that, I don't think. So the first floor, the first livable space is what you're looking at when you say the flood zone and being below. So cars parked underneath and the retail space could possibly be in the flood zone prior to 2050,
2100.
2100.
If I could add, Madam Chair, the fact that this is a special exception now, as opposed to 5 years ago or whenever it was, when it was by right. One of the reasons that I raised that comment There's a, I don't know the case law with special exceptions and the Board of Adjustments criteria as far as, case law. We're going to defer to the Board of Adjustment. In your role as making a recommendation, you can ask them to, you can suggest that they consider that. If this was a by right plan, we probably wouldn't be making that comment, and you would be, out of bounds and asking for elevations above today's floodplain elevations. But since it's a special exception, I think it's right, especially since you're making a recommendation. Does that make sense?
There are some things to consider. When we have designed this, or at least laid it out grading wise, we work with the fire trucks that are out there to make sure that they can get up and down that driveway and the percentage that we start raising that driveway up to 12% or 13%, it becomes an issue with emergency access. So the road raises 4 feet, I don't know that I would try to raise the building up that significantly.
And without getting into too much of future details, non-residential in the floodplain can be flood proofed. Is that correct?
Correct.
So the retail part, non-residential doesn't need to be elevated with the first floor. Those types of uses can be within the floodplain as long as they're flood proof, that they have to submit engineering plans and calculations showing that the building can withstand certain.
At that time, you would start putting vents in and make sure the flood water can go through, you make sure your electrics are put in half above whatever flood elevation is. And the building itself, you could do seals around the doors, you could do a lot of different things that would make the building flood proof for that lower elevation. The proposed multifamily building is located in close proximity, approximately 55 feet from a sewage pump station owned and maintained by Newcastle County. The applicant should contact the county regarding measures to mitigate potential odors from the pump station. We're going to go and meet with Newcastle County on this to show them what we are doing. We've already contacted about sewer availability. That's not an issue with this project, but we are going to take this in. We're building all around the outside of it. It would be, it would be in our client's interest not to have that piece anymore and not to have to worry about it. But there's I think a 99-year lease that if memory serves me on that property just to use for the pump. So we do know that we need to discuss it with Newcastle County Special Services. Next one. Okay, I'm sorry. The applicant should discuss the intent of the proposed subdivision to create lots A and B. Lot A is basically just a non-touched wetland area. Just the lender is requiring that all the site is raised out of. In order for us to not touch this and raise it up, we need to make it not part of all of the site. And the same thing here, we're not touching this because that would require, raising this up another 7 or 8 feet, which, at this time, that's not part of this project. So we're proposing a lot B and a lot A, and how that works out, it's still going to be currently owned by the same people. It's not going to be sold off by this. They could offer to the county and say, take your responsibility, take it. Let's see if that works out. That's one thing about that. But that's the intent of A and B, and not the overall site.
And this was the same construct that was used for the Garrison as well in terms of the wetlands part of that property. It was taken out of the collateral for the bank. It's pretty standard for a bank. That's not.
That was.
Do you know if there was I know you can't do much with it regulatory wise, was there a conservation easement put on the Garrison's leftover land?
I'm not sure, but that's definitely something we would look into, and we would certainly find it.
I don't believe there was. Of course not.
Can that be explained a little more? I don't really we were talking about the bank, doesn't see that as collateral, and why do they not? I don't understand.
A lender isn't gonna allow a piece of the property to be in flood zone. So that's what this does. We're raising up 100% of the bank's collateral. And that's one of the stipulations to lending to a project. So this is the same thing that happens in Harrison when you have a site that is partially flood zone, partially not. That you have to subdivide it out.
That green part there, that wetland.
This is all.
This is the line, this is the regulatory line, in which we're not touching the other side. This is the part that's gonna be partial. Number 10 is our understanding that a blanket easement exists across the subject parcel on behalf of the city for ingress, egress, or regress, and purpose of preserving, installing, maintaining, replacing utilities and related apparatus.
Appurtenances.
Thank you. This easement was required by the city planning commission as a condition of approval for the subdivision plan that was created, the subject parcel in 2002. This issue should be discussed in more detail with the city attorney. Relative to the special exception application, it would be advisable to obtain some feedback from the city council as to the potential extinguishment of easement prior to consideration of the board of adjustment. So we have taken into account this exact recommendation. We've spoken with the city solicitor before we can address it. We asked to find out what the city's interest is in the easement, so we can address it specifically. As of right now, nobody knows why the city is a party to this agreement. We have an agreement with the neighbors who is a two-party agreement between us and them, and then the city also has a party to it. And so right now, the city solicitor is asking the city engineer and various departments as to why this easement exists. Once we know what this, but until then, nobody has, including the city solicitor. But we are addressing it. We understand that it's addressed.
The applicant should provide additional information regarding the nature and purposes of our project. We've discussed that numerous times. It's going to make the structural wall in the back more natural looking. And that's really the only reason. Not having a big.
So it is structural.
It's not a board in place concrete wall or piles and piles or something like that. It's going to be something more natural that can be made stone, gabions. I mean, there's different things we have to figure out exactly what's going to go back. I'm looking today at a vinyl sheet pile system, which I think is not the right thing. We're using residential areas. I don't think that's the right thing for what we want to accomplish in the back. You see some gabions, they start having things grow over them. It looks a lot more natural, but it's still a retaining wall.
I saw on the bottom part of the plan reference to mean high water. Would high tide be getting to the retaining wall? There's a reference to mean high tide.
I remember. Mean high tide is well below the retaining wall. Where the retaining wall would start, the mean high tide, he has it listed at 0.16. And I think the retaining wall starts between 4 and 5. That's good enough. For the conditions, I would say it will, yes.
So you reach that retaining whatever's gone in.
Correct. I mean, it goes over the whole site today, so it's supposed to. I mean, my understanding is the owners haven't seen flooding there, but I don't know, I'm not there all the time. The applicant should seek comment from emergency service providers regarding the plan and proposed development. Again, as we stated before, we have done that. We've gone through several editions of this plan before we submitted it with their blessing that, we could serve the site.
That was the end of the.
Yeah, that's the last one.
the formal question.
All right, so any additional questions? And process-wise, we could make a
I got a quick-
recommendation to the, for this to proceed to the Board of Adjustment with these considerations, basically. You know, including things like submitting plans to Plus and receiving Plus comments and kind of down the list, or we could decide. We don't have to recommend this project. It needs to go to the Board of Adjustment. It's, the comp plan is correct for the land use. It's zoned in the downtown gateway, but it needs a special exception and variances. And we're recommending that all these criteria be met and presented to the Board of Adjustment.
I think back to Chris's point, that number 4 procedural, that maybe. Rushing it right to.
Can you speak? up?
I'm sorry, yes, we're rushing it right to the Board of Adjustment, if we wait for the review from Plus.
Yeah, are we supposed to review it? Is that,
Again, you guys have picked good, two projects, two difficult projects to start with as a kind of a new plan commission. So there's a couple different ways this could go, given your role as making a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment. As making a recommendation, so first of all, the code was just revised to require that anything that rises to the level of a plus review, which is anything over 50,000 square feet of non-residential and 50 units, has to go to Plus. But we didn't think of special exceptions. So we were thinking of those things by right. And that anything that goes to Plus, we wrote in that new ordinance that they have to come to you first with a concept plan. So that the first review of anything that requires Plus review comes here first. This is a special exception. So we made the applicant come here first also with a concept plan before they submitted it to Plus. So again, your role now is to make a recommendation to the Board of Adjustment. So without guiding you in any particular direction for the moment, I guess there's several different ways this could go. Am I okay here, Madam Chair? You could say we have enough information and we recommend disapproval for the following reasons. We have enough information and we recommend approval for the following reasons and maybe with the following conditions. Or simply state that we find this consistent with the comprehensive plan, and here are the things that we think need to be addressed prior to it going to the Board of Adjustment. I would recommend the latter. Yeah. It's not, as a recommending body, you can't really hold the applicant up from going to the Board of Adjustment. You could say, we recommend disapproval, no way, and they could still go to the Board of Adjustment. You know, it's their right to go to the Board of Adjustment. We're here to make a recommendation. So if you feel inclined to disapprove it, approve it, or just state those things that you think are important for the Board of Adjustment to consider. When it gets to the Board of Adjustment, if they say, what the heck was the Planning Commission thinking? Why did they not review the traffic study before it came to us? They can remand it back to you and say, Planning Commission, what do you think of the traffic impact study conclusions? What do you think of the sea level rise scenarios? You weren't very specific in your recommendations. So
Conservation easement. I tried to make notes of all the things.
So, given the fact that the Board of Adjustment has a lot of latitude in what it can ask for, I would suggest that you forward it with recommendations regarding certain considerations being addressed so that the Board of Adjustment has the necessary information so it can make its determination on the special exception. Again, if it's approved by them, it comes back to you with a full site plan. And then it would be okay to proceed with that site plan and that engineering.
So can we make a list if we did number 3? Or is it the sense of the group, do you want to do number 3 or? do you wanna do-
That would. be
Yeah. So how do we write the motion or the whatever?
We have some notes. I have some notes.
No, really?
Do you wanna,
If you were inclined to, you have to, this has to go to the Board of Adjustment. So if you were inclined not to make an explicit recommend disapproval or recommend approval, you would say something to the effect that you would find the proposed development consistent with the comprehensive plan. In addition, the Planning Commission recommends that the applicant provide the following prior to proceeding to the Board of Adjustment. Submit plans to Plus and address Plus comments. Provide elevation and floodplain data specific to the proposed development for end-of-century sea level rise projections as established in the 2018 vulnerability assessment. Provide architectural plans demonstrating compliance and commitment to the DG design standards contained in section 230-21.1G of the zoning ordinance. Prepare a traffic impact study for review by DelDOT and the city engineer. Obtain comments from Newcastle County regarding the proximity to the existing sewage pump station. Obtain feedback from the city attorney and/or city council regarding the extinguishment of the easement on the property. Obtain comments from the city fire marshal. Provide additional information regarding the nature and purpose of the non-structural retaining wall. Confirmation on the methodology used to measure building height. Obtain feedback from the county and/or city council regarding the proposed lots A and B. And provide information regarding the nature of filling and wetland impact. Now, some of those have been answered by the applicant, and they will, the Board of Adjustment may find the minutes of this meeting having answered some of those questions. But those are things that the applicant should be prepared to repeat or refer to the minutes of this meeting saying they feel that they've already addressed them. But that will be up to the Board of Adjustment.
And Chris, of those things that you just mentioned, it seems like a lot of those things would be required once the Board of Adjustment sends it back to us. Is that correct? And so, I mean, is there anything? Is there any kind of exception that we're asking, or not exception, but anything different that we're asking that would not be expected if it moved forward from the Board of Adjustment? Am I saying that right?
No, if this was a by right plan, is there anything in here that
Right,
you wouldn't get anyway?
Right.
Probably not, except perhaps the sea level rise request,
Detail, okay.
because that's not currently in your ordinance. But it's just letting the this is just information for the Board of Adjustment to consider, to make sure that it knows that these were your concerns or issues regarding this project. Would you get these if it was not a special exception? Maybe. Yes, you would.
I just wasn't sure if we had to emphasize anything.
is there any comments or additional things that?
All those points I had identified, so I'm learning how to do my job here. finally.
Are we allowed to make very brief comments?
All right, I guess we should make a motion.
I move that we move forward with
What Chris
Chris's
just
wording
said.
of the recommendation to the board of-
Recommend or not recommend.
Oh, I'll be dead.
just move forward with
Just
these
move
considerations.
Forward with the considerations, but not recommend or not.
So, you know,
Do you want to read just the very beginning and not all the points, how it's worded?
motion to find the proposed development consistent with the comprehensive plan. In addition, the planning commission recommends that the applicant provide the following prior to proceeding to the Board of Adjustment.
That's good. All right, so you made a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any additional comments? Now that we have a motion. A second. All right, I guess we'll do a try voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, anything else on this before we move briefly to special projects? All right, the two that we have noted on the agenda, the transportation plan. What I know about the transportation plan is the management team, including DelDOT, have been making comments and edits to the plan. It's been reviewed by Wilmapco's Public Advisory Committee, its Technical Advisory Committee, and Wilmapco Council will review it on September 8th. And following that, Wilmapco's waiting for a date from the city for it to be reviewed by City Council and the public. So it's from what I saw, I did review it. DelDOT's made some comments. A lot of the pieces of the transportation plan are prioritized in the plan. And a couple of the comments from DelDOT is everything can't be a high priority because they tend to fund the high priority before the lower priorities. But anyway, we should be seeing that soon in the city. And then the Sea Level Rise Task Force, which I am on. One of the recent developments, well, we've been researching possible funding for increased protection from flooding, which could include raising our existing dikes and also filling in the gaps between the dikes, which includes the historic district. We found a possible source of funding from everything from soup to nuts, including engineering, from the Natural Resource Conservation Service in the Department of Agriculture. In July, we had the Delaware representative join our meeting. She was very encouraging, and funding would come through the agency's watershed protection program. Council voted last meeting to send a letter requesting the agency to do a feasibility study to see if we would qualify. So they would look at the whole city and they would do engineering and fund the whole thing, but we'll see. I know it sounds too good to be true, but we've also been working with Kevin Donnelly from the Newcastle County Conservation District. He had worked with this engineer from this organization and they were both very encouraging, so we'll see. So those are my two updates on those studies. Is there anything else? I don't know about car chargers or any other special projects that anyone would like to put on? Matthew, I'll put you on the spot. Is HAC addressing electric chargers in the historic district?
It did.
Oh, so other than putting them in parking lots, like how to, I was just wondering about the people who live in park on the street. I mean, you're starting to see lines coming out from the houses, and if they were addressing how historically to. Okay.
The only way they would address that is if somebody applied to them, I think. That's my sense of how that works.
All right, all right. Right, you see them running out from the houses. Any other comments from commissioners?
I would just like to make a general comment. It was something I found out in regards to the fire districts. The fire districts do not fall within the city limits specifically. So while some areas are within city limits, they're not all serviced by Goodwill. They can be serviced by other districts specifically. So just something that was brought up, somebody at one of the meetings thought that Goodwill serviced anything within our specific city limits, and that's not necessarily true. They're not divided out that way. That was all.
Where did you hear that?
No, that's not exactly
Holloway
true.
Terrace would service Lucan's,
That's the only part that Goodwill does not serve.
but that is outside the city.
Right, Lugan's Drive from about, just past the tracks out is Terrace, and that is it. Goodwill does service everything.
But that
else.
was brought up at one of the
Right.
meetings specific to the Lucan's
Right.
Drive.
All right, thank you. Anything else?
Yeah,
Yes.
I just want to say thank you for all the people from the community who came to make comments. I think that's important to hear everything. So please keep coming. And also want to thank Chris for being patient with our new team here and explaining things.
My pleasure.
So thank
Yeah, very nice. Yeah.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And the only other comment I make is every other meeting I've come to here has been like 10 minutes. And now it's almost 9 o'clock. Justin's gonna stop taking food in a few minutes. So if there was any way to get a forecast when we go into these meetings, this presentation that we just saw took over an hour. Just some sense, is this a 10-minute meeting or is this a 2-hour meeting? Why are you shaking your head? No, you don't.
you. You can do that. You can do that. That'd be great. You can do that.
You know, when you have applications, you kind of never know.
Right.
Well, now I know if it's an application, I can plan it too. But anyway, thank you. It's a good meeting.
Oh, yes, I'm so, there's a public comment. Oh, it's real, it's short, and there's just one. So I should have done this during public comment. To planning commissioners, unfortunately, I'm unable to attend tonight's meeting, though I know I'm being repetitive. It is important to emphasize that before any large development are approved, it is vital that the town address the flooding for which we are greatly at risk. We are responsible for protecting the citizens of Newcastle from projects that could increase that risk. For at least 15 years, the city government has noticed, but not sufficiently addressed that increasing danger. Now is the time before it is too late. With respect to proposed developments within the city limits, the purpose of the developers is not in improving Newcastle, but in making money. Once their project is built and sold, they have no further interest in what happens to Newcastle. Thank you for reading this document, Dorsey Fisk. All right, anything else? Motion to adjourn? Make a motion. Second? All in favor? Aye. Better run.
We talked to Bill about more tables.
Yeah.
I would like-
I know.
I would like-
Oh, yeah.